gamers, welcome back. Glad we could have you. This is June, and June is going to be our Handhelds month. Speaking of handhelds, I do have some of a bit of collection. I've been collecting many of my handhelds since my childhood. I had a Game Boy growing up, but I was also lucky enough to have a Game Gear. We'll get to that a little bit later, because trust me, there's a lot. Game Boy. Quite a miracle. They even did a movie about it recently. This little device right here can play everything that was released for 3 different consoles over a period of almost 30 years. Came out in 1989, and the last Game Boy game that was released in North America was Samurai Kyono in February of 2008. So that's almost 30 years worth of games. About 1,200 when you add up just the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color games. When you add in the GBA games, you're looking at a library of over 2,200. My 3DS, which will play DS games as well. 3DS had a library of 713. The DS had a library of almost 2,300. Between those two, when you add just these two systems together, it becomes quite astonishing that there's almost over 5,000 different games you can play with just these two systems alone. Very portable. The mods are easy to find. They're easy to work on, even for beginners. And I recommend getting into Game Boy Colors, original Game Boys. If you want to learn more about modding and small electronic work, they're great. They're easy to get into. I've loved mine. I didn't have one when it came out. I got it a little bit later. This is actually a modded shell right here. And I get a lot of use out of it. Nintendo will never be able to lose what they have with that. The Game Boy and the DS and the 3DS afterwards, quite a multitude of games covering hundreds of different styles, dozens of different genres. And it's just mind-blowing when you think about it, all the games that can be played. But my passion when I was growing up was the Sega Game Gear, because I had one. As some of you may or may not know, I'm going for a complete collection. And here is part of it, actually. This is just part of my collection. It was released in October of 1990 in North America. It was generally meant to compete with the Atari Lynx and Game Boy. It had a lot of advantages to it. It had a wider screen. It had a landscape console for it, as you can see. Mine has been slightly modified, and I've had the caps redone on mine, only buttons replaced, but it's still just an original model. And it still works great as long as you can get those caps replaced, because the capacitors for the original Game Boy, or for the original Game Gear, not good. It did a bit better in the European market. In the North American market, they sold about 10.5 million units, whereas the Game Boy sold like 110 million units. So it could not compete. Sega did not have the third-party support that Nintendo did. And it kind of showed. Whereas the Game Boy market was, I don't want to say flooded, but it had quite the variety of games. You could find every manner of games, even though some people would say, oh, the screen quality was bad. Who needs 4 shades of pea green? It worked. It was cheaper. It was more available to the market. And they had third-party support for all the game design. Sega made some great games. There are quite the multitude of accessories, too. And even when you just get into the accessories, I mean, Game Boy did a lot of accessories. There were lights. There was the Handy Boy. There was ways you could magnify the screen. They did a sonar fish finder, a sewing machine, which is extraordinarily expensive nowadays. They did an add-on for children that had to go and have surgery done that would help anesthetize them so they'd be more comfortable with the surgery. Yeah. I want to be sedated with a Game Boy? Thank you, AVGN. It's amazing the stuff that they came up with. Game Gear got down a bit more practical. There's only one Game Gear add-on that I really don't have. I don't have the TV tuner. And nowadays, since analog television isn't a thing anymore, it's kind of just a novelty. The add-ons that I do have, of which this one was never produced by Sega, but it was endorsed by Sega. They didn't care. This is the Game Genie for the Sega Game Gear, which just simply attaches in its simple capacity. The one I got at the convention still had the little manual in it. Isn't that cute? And it folds in right there. Unlike the other Game Genies that were actually produced, this one has a separate on-off button for the codes themselves. So even during gameplay, you can actually turn the codes on and off separately, which I thought was really cool. I didn't actually know that until I picked it up. And because it's an 8-bit system, but it's basically a Sega Master System in trimmed-down format. For those of you who don't know, the Sega Master System was Sega's first attempt here at North American Games. 10 times more popular in Europe and South America. Hello to all my South American fans. I really wish that I had a Sega Master System growing up. I never had a chance. I have grown a little bit of a library, about 35, 40 games or so, and several of them are early Sega titles, and they're actually really good for what they are. So being that the technology for this was a trimmed-down Sega Master System, here, I'll show you. Basically, all you had to do was just load it in. Here's the device itself. You would just load it in, screw it together, and it would sit. Take your cartridge and load it in. And now I'm playing R-Type, which is generally meant for a Sega Master System. But now you can play it on the Game Gear. And almost all almost all Sega Master System games were compatible with the Game Gear, except for the Majesco models, which were released later. Since its release was in 1991, April of 1991 here in North America. I think I might have gotten that date wrong, but yes, it was April of 1991 in North America. They continued to release games up until 1997. Afterwards, it took a bit of a lull. It took a bit of a hiatus. Afterwards, Sega licensed out the rights to make the Game Gear and several games to Majesco, a North American game manufacturing company. And they reproduced the system in 2000 and 2001 up until 2002 as a budget console. But for an 8-bit system, I've always found that it just had so much going for it. Sorry, Pixel Game Squad, I'm going to have to disagree with you guys on this one. But I'm not blind to its problems. Yes, it required 6 AA batteries, which, let me tell you, I went through about 2 sets when I was 10 before my dad finally went, nope, we're getting rechargeables, and you're only going to use rechargeables for this. That was the trick. So that's how I was able to get around that. And sometimes I did have to sit next to a wall outlet and just plug it in because it uses the Mark II Genesis. With that, it had a total library of 234 games. And with 234 games, even with small amounts of third-party support, you can get some great titles. Just some fantastic titles. There were 9 Sonic games. One of the best beat 'em ups that I've ever seen on any portable console, Streets of Rage 2. They did a fantastic translation with that. There were RPGs like Shining Force and Crystal Warriors and Axe Battler. They did puzzle games like Super Columns and Bubble Bobble. Do I have that one? Yes, I do. I have it right here. There we go. And even some surprising titles for people as well. A lot of people don't know there was a Mega Man game at least in North America, for the Sega Game Gear. Normally you'd think, oh, Capcom has exclusive rights with Nintendo and blah, blah, blah. Well, no, they got this done too. I don't know how they did it. They did fighting games. They did, there was a Virtual Fighter. They did Mortal Kombat 2. They did Fatal Fury Special. These are fantastic fighting games for an 8-bit system. What I think people really need to understand is that you got to take yourself back to when it was. Don't compare it to now. You can't. This will dwarf that every single time. In everything, I can check my email on this thing. It's a Game Gear. But for what it did, for what it was capable of, it was pretty fun. And I loved it. Some of the other accessories that I happen to have that I've picked up. This is an interesting little cable right here. I'll show some video here. This is a cable that allows you that when you plug in the Sega Master System converter, it allows you to plug this into the gear-to-gear port, which would normally require 2 Game Gears. And instead it has the back end of a 9-pin right here. So all I do is just plug in a Sega Master System controller and voila. Now I don't need 2 copies of the game and 2 Sega Game Gears. But unfortunately, it only works with Master System games. It does not work with standard Game Gear games. So if I wanted to play Streets of Rage 2 with a buddy on the Sega Game Gear, I would actually still need this. He would need one. We both need the game and the cord. I have a cord. See? It had carrying cases. It had manuals. I've got about 20 manuals or so. I'm going for a complete set. I still get a lot of use out of my system. Sometimes I take it with me for my work. When I don't have anything to do, I'll just plug out and I'll pull out a game. I'll pull out Columns. I'll pull out Streets of Rage 2. I'll pull out something. And I still have a lot of fun with it. And I like these old retro games and these old systems. And they're getting harder and harder to collect for. They're not exactly expensive because they're not very sought after, but they are still uncommon. And the fun of it is the hunt. Oh, but wait, there's more. Bit of bonus content, here we go. This particular Game Gear right here is a little bit special. I don't even want to get into how much money it cost me because it's almost laughable. But this particular Game Gear is actually almost kind of like a Sega Switch. A Sega Switch? It's got a VGA port that goes out to an HDMI dongle that I have hooked up down below, and ports that go out for specialized 6-button Genesis controllers that have been adapted. So I can actually put anything that's on this Game Gear onto a big screen TV. I generally don't use it too much outside of playing the game console on my television. Like, I don't take it with me because it's very expensive to get this mod done. And I love the system. I love that that I was able to get this done. But it's yeah, it's really expensive. So beyond that, the modding community for this is amazing. You can find out a lot of stuff on smspower.org and several other sites too. There's a British site. I'll see if I can. I'll put the link somewhere down here that sells Game Gear accessories and they specialize in like drop-in replacement parts, like replacement audio parts, replacement power adapter boards. No soldering required at all. They're very nice. I don't want to say Rainbow Six. I don't know. I'll drop the link in down here. Those guys are great. I've ordered a couple of things from them, including glass screens. Our last video actually only showed a little bit of content between me and Kent during our video game challenge, our buying challenge, which was fantastic. Thank you, Kent. We had a lot of fun with that. But at the convention, I didn't actually get a chance to, from the video afterwards, I didn't get a chance to show off some of the stuff that I picked up. So some of the stuff that we picked up, I wanted to have a chance to show off some of that. Got Krabby Attack. That's the VIG game by MGC that they did this year. Fantastic. I saw it played. I'm going to do my best to. I got two of them, one from me and one from Valley Girl. So yeah, I think this is going to turn out to be really cool. And the second one I ended up picking up Copper Jacket. Looks like a overhead shooter and a side scroller, a little bit. Kind of like Heavy Barrel. Not exactly Contra, not exactly Jackal, a bit more like Heavy Barrel a bit. So looks pretty slick. I saw it played it. I liked it. Picked it up for $35. Like these guys. They do a good job. I got and then I got COVID-19, the cartridge. John Riggs, thank you so much. Have a chance to check this out. And Block 'em Sock 'em on the 7800 by John Hancock. I picked up several other pieces there, improved my collection. I might end up making next month's video about my collections itself, if folks actually want to learn about such things. Until then, we'll see you guys in the next one.